Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. I'm your host Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. Now, in this episode, we're going to discuss one of the most censored, controversial, and critical events in modern Chinese history, the Tiananmen Square Massacre of 1989. It's been 35 years since that fateful day, but the shadow it casts over China remains long and ominous. Why does the Chinese government go to such lengths to erase it from memory, and what are the implications for us today? Now buckle up, this is going to be a deep dive into history, politics, and the power of memory. Let's take a look at a report to find out more.
Human Rights Watch accuses the Chinese government of intensifying its suppression of any discussion or commemoration of the 1989 Tiananmen Square Massacre. In the lead-up to the 35th year mark on June 4th, authorities have imprisoned activists in China and Hong Kong, heightened surveillance on others, and even arrested individuals for social media posts deemed sensitive. The Tiananmen Square Massacre unfolded in response to peaceful gatherings of students, workers, and others demanding greater freedoms and an end to corruption. The government's response was swift and brutal. Martial law was declared in late May, followed by the deployment of the military in early June. On June 3rd and 4th, soldiers opened fire on unarmed protesters, killing an unknown number of civilians. In the aftermath, the government launched a nationwide crackdown, arresting thousands on charges like counter-revolution and vandalism. Despite international calls for justice, the Chinese government has never accepted responsibility for the massacre, nor has it held an officials accountable. HRW has urged the Chinese government to take several key steps, including respecting freedom of expression and assembly, meeting with the Tiananmen Mothers Group, and offering apologies, permitting an independent investigation to the events, allowing the return of exiled citizens, and prosecuting those responsible for the killings. The organization also implored foreign governments to renew efforts demanding accountability from China. This includes supporting the 2020 call by UN human rights experts for an independent UN mandate to monitor and report on Chinese human rights violations. Additionally, HRW urged public commemorations of the anniversary by foreign embassies and consulates in China, along with a renewed push for answers from the Chinese government.
Thank you.
And now let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Now let's set the stage. Beijing, 1989, the air buzzing with the energy of hope and change. Thousands of students and citizens gather in Tiananmen Square, calling for political reform, freedom of speech, and an end to government corruption. It was a rare moment in China's long history, a genuine grassroots movement demanding democracy in a country ruled by the iron grip of the Communist Party. But this story doesn't have a happy ending. The Chinese government, led by the then paramount leader Deng Xiaoping, decided that the calls for freedom and reform were too dangerous to their hold on power. As the protests grew, so did the government's resolve to quash them. On June 4th, 1989, the world watched in horror as the People's Liberation Army rolled into Tiananmen Square with tanks and live ammunition. What followed was a brutal crackdown, with estimates of the death toll ranging from several hundred to possibly thousands. The exact number is still unknown, hidden behind a veil of state secrecy and propaganda. And now you might be wondering, who was the man at the helm during this turbulent time? Well, Deng Xiaoping, a name synonymous with China's economic reforms and modernization, Deng was a complex figure, praised for transforming China's economy, but also responsible for the crackdown that would forever mar his legacy. By the late 1970s, he had become the most powerful figure in China, steering the country away from Maoist orthodoxy and towards economic pragmatism. Deng's reform opened China to the global market, lifting millions out of poverty and setting the stage for China's rise as a global superpower. Yet, despite his economic successes, Deng was uncompromising when it comes to maintaining the Communist Party's monopoly on power. The Tiananmen Square Massacre was the ultimate manifestation of this ruthlessness, a stark reminder that economic liberalization does not necessarily lead to political freedom. The Chinese government has gone to extraordinary lengths to erase the memory of Tiananmen. Mentioning it in China, and you risk severe repercussions. It's a taboo topic, heavily censored in the media, education, and even online. The Chinese government's strategy is clear. If they can control the narrative, they can control the future. But why is this historical amnesia so critical for the Chinese Communist Party? Well, the answer lies in the power of memory. Remembering Tiananmen Square is not just about honoring those who died. It's about acknowledging the ongoing struggle for human rights and political freedom in China. The government's fear is that remembering Tiananmen could ignite a new wave of dissent, threatening their iron-fisted rule, and this is why it's so important for us, outside of China, to keep this memory alive. Silence and forgetfulness serve only the oppressor, and as we reflect on Tiananmen, it's crucial to remember that the struggle for freedom and democracy is not unique to China. Around the world, people continue to fight against oppressive regimes and authoritarian rule. The spirit of Tiananmen lives on in Hong Kong, in Myanmar, in Belarus, and wherever people stand up against tyranny. The Tiananmen Square Massacre is a tragic chapter in Chinese history. However, it also serves as a powerful reminder of the resilience and courage of those who dare to dream of a better world. So, let us remember Tiananmen not as a distant, forgotten event, but as a call to action for justice, freedom, and human dignity. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Jakub Jakubowski, Deputy Director of the Center for Eastern Studies. Hello, sir, and welcome to Eastern Express.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So, on the 4th of June 1989, nothing happened. In fact, it didn't happen so hard that China is trying to memory hole its entire population. Can you first give us a context of why the desperation in suppressing this information?
Well, certainly June 4th, 1989 has been a pivotal moment for the People's Republic of China, a moment which set its fate as an authoritarian regime. China could have been different back then, and both in terms of the demands of the protesters, but also the undercurrents inside the Communist Party, parts of which were much more liberal than the ones that eventually took power after 1989. And the sole fact that the moment was so pivotal and China could have been different, I think, is the primary reason why the party is so obsessed with this very date.
Right, and looking at present day, it's still a very touchy, very taboo topic within China. Can you give us a context why that is so, and why couldn't the Chinese just acknowledge what happened in the past and maybe say that, well, we won't be doing that again?
Well, of course, there's been a lot of people, thousands of people, tens of thousands, usually students, people of the elite, partially workers' leaders, because this was ultimately the trigger that made the CCP made the decision to crush the protest, was when the peaceful student protests were joined by labor, and this was the moment they decided to intervene. So the point I want to make is that there have been tens of thousands of people actively involved in this protest, still within the system, within the society, of course, oppressed and forced to forget that. But I think it's still a symbol that many people in China do remember. Of course, the CCP wants to erase this memory from the public discourse. You can even see this in the social media, with the censorship, but even within the messaging apps, where the party is actively censoring private talks within the messengers that mention the Tiananmen Square or the 4th of June.
Right. I do actually have very similar experience when it comes to the Chinese-speaking part of the world. We do know that if you ever got into a social media argument with a Chinese person, you can always just type in the Tiananmen Square incident, press enter, and the guy will be off from the internet for a couple of hours. And you brought up a very interesting word here, that is a force to forget. And I'm wondering if you can tell us how effective it is trying to crack down on people, on their free speech, on their free will of thought, and to try to force them to memory hold themselves.
Well, it's really hard to measure it, of course, and even more so for a foreigner. I think, especially now, 2024, China is a type of a society, a system where people are actively forced to self-censor themselves, to be suspicious towards interaction, especially with the foreigners. So it's really hard to get to the real depth of the social memory there. I think there are many people that do know about this, the thing that happened on 4th of July of June. I'm sorry, 1989. But I think there's a growing cohort of people that actually do not know, and they were already raised within this new ecosystem of a very strict and effective internet censorship, where you basically just don't see these things. And not only because they are being actively censored, but also because the algorithms just feed you the type of content that just avoids these kinds of topics. And if you add to this that everybody in China knows that it's much safer to stay away from politically sensitive issues, then you might actually feel comfortable being fed with neutral content that does not touch upon those issues.
Right, like you mentioned, a lot of it is also a self-censorship issue where maybe people do know about the incident but prefer not to talk about it. And when looking at this in not just a historic context but also a modern one, can you help us draw some parallel to the Western world? What can we learn or take warning from these attempts at changing or censoring history in order to achieve political gains?
Well, I think in order to achieve this kind of effects, we still don't know how effective the CCP was in eradicating this. But in order to achieve it, you need to have a robust censorship and a digital censorship apparatus in the first place. So I would say the type of debates we do have within the West on our history is still somehow different. We do not agree on certain topics or certain, certain ways of depicting the reality. The debates are there within the West, but still they're all in open. You know why it's happening. You can contest it, and you can speak freely about that on the internet. While in China, I think due to this extremely robust system of censorship, you're sometimes not even allowed to, of course, write or read about that, but you very often just don't find these kind of things. You're just living your life and it just does not appear anywhere around you. So I think that's the main difference, but of course, should the situation within the Western societies anytime go toward this kind of active censorship, I think this is a huge warning for us too.
Right, what are you talking about? I've asked people who live in China, they all say they can't complain. Now, in the meantime, I also like to ask you about the Russian propaganda, because we also seeing some kind of effort in controlling the narrative. And when it comes to the international scale, we do also see Russia, China working hand in hand right now to craft a different reality, a different perception of how the world is. Can you help us understand the attempt there?
Well, I think there are generally two approaches that are somehow complementary. Russians excel at disinformation, so making up facts, making up narratives that don't have, that not attached to reality, or at least they're not representing any actual things, and just to distort the views, to sow discord within societies. Whereas in China, they're more into a classic propaganda when you have a very firmly set of narratives that you just disseminate around the world. And I think, as I said, they're highly complementary. If they converge at certain notions and goals, where now it's mostly about undermining the Western-led international system, hitting on the U.S., depicting the U.S., Europe, or NATO as colonial powers. That's exactly what they do, but the type of tactics they employ are somehow different. Russia is more of a spoiler, trying to augment any divisions they find out within the society. So they support both left and right fringes of the political spectrum. Whereas for China, it's a huge volumes of propaganda that sometimes slowly but firmly drip into the minds, just like they do at home.
Right. I think you also brought up a very good metaphor of the slow drip of information here. One of the things that we've seen China and Russia do as well in the past year is, like, for example, redefining borders or drawing borders, showing maps that does not reflect reality. And how much of it is an attempt at telling a lie long enough until it becomes somewhat of a reality?
Well, of course, we unfortunately live in times where borders are being redrawn forcefully, and especially now in Europe, we see it in Ukraine. And I think this is making those maps or graphical, imaginary, or even memes, internet memes, much more dangerous if they're put in the hands of robust propaganda apparatuses. This is clearly shown with the, for example, the maps that the Russians produce, which are very tricky because the kind of maps they present and disseminate, especially in the global south, are saying, look, all we want is the eastern half of Ukraine, and NATO or whatever European countries take the rest and ultimately settle a deal here. And this is implying that actually what the West stands for is actual division and conquest of Ukraine, just like the Russians do. They're putting an equality sign between their logic and our logic, which is false. But through this kind of maps, I think they're trying to input this kind of notions into the global public opinion. And also playing on these anti-colonial sentiments, which are very much alive in many quarters of the world.
Right. Thank you for reminding us of the global south, because that also prompts me to ask, can you give us some example of some of the places that are more susceptible to these type of propaganda or information manipulation? I think in the West, we kind of look at it with a skeptical eye, or some of us actually even find it ridiculous. But the same can be said for a certain other part of the world.
Well, I wish the things you said were true on the West. I think we're also susceptible to this, but at least we have strong civil societies that can actually push back against this kind of propaganda and disinformation. Hopefully, I think we should still work on that. But certainly there are places on Earth where the access to the information, to the good quality of information, is very limited when the media systems are weaker. And so that's where I think Russia or China may find a kind of a soft underbelly that they can approach. We have recently seen a number of these kind of developments. For example, in the Indo-Pacific, we had the New Caledonia, with the French sending police forces there, suppressing protests, which were arguably, as reportedly as the French are saying, instigated by the Russians and Azerbaijanis. But then again, you had, for example, the Solomon Islands and the elections there, when we have some traces of Russian interference and Chinese interference into the outcome of the elections, which are actually strategically very important, as the Solomon Islands are very much strategically positioned within the Indo-Pacific.
All right, thank you so much for all your input and insight and helping us understand this issue a bit further. Really appreciate it, and thanks again for being with us on Eastern Express.
Thank you very much.
And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has declared a permanent NATO military presence in Lithuania. Now, this announcement came during an Eastern German Economic Forum where Scholz emphasized NATO's commitment to defend every square inch of its territory.
The German-led brigade will be stationed near the border with Belarus, with the main part expected to be relocated by 2026 and reaching full operational capability by 2027. This brigade will include heavy units with maneuver battalions and necessary support equipment, including fire support units. Approximately 5,000 German soldiers and civilians are anticipated to be transferred to Lithuania, some accompanied by their families. The decision follows the deployment of additional NATO contingents in the Baltic states, particularly in Lithuania last year. The presence of full NATO brigade in Lithuania is now a future possibility, as the alliance seeks to demonstrate its readiness to counter an aggression. The strategic shift from rotational to permanent troops underscores the alliance's response to the ongoing threats from Russia. Chancellor Scholz stated that diplomacy can only succeed from a position of strength, and this move is a clear signal to Russia that NATO is ready to defend its member states.
Vice President Kamala Harris will represent the United States at the upcoming Global Peace Summit in Switzerland. Her presence is expected to underscore the Biden-Harris administration's unwavering commitment to supporting Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity.
After weeks of speculation, the US has confirmed its attendance at the Peace Summit in Switzerland. Although while everyone was hoping for attendance of President Joe Biden, Washington is sending its Vice President Kamala Harris. The decision comes in the wake of reports that Biden is likely to miss the summit due to the scheduling conflict with a campaign fundraiser event. This development follows a rebuttal from Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's accusations of China attempting to undermine the summit, accusation China denies. Despite this, over 100 countries and international organizations have confirmed their attendance. The summit aims to address critical issues including energy security, the exchange of captives, the return of deported children, and global food security. However, Russia, which was not invited, has been noted by Swiss hosts as an inevitable participant in the peace process sooner or later.
Iranian parliamentary speaker Mohammad Bakir Kalibaf, a former military commander, has officially registered as a candidate for Iran's upcoming presidential election. He joins the list of approximately 36 mostly hardline candidates seeking to replace the late President Ibrahim Raisi, who tragically died in a helicopter crash last month.
The presidential election landscape in Iran has become increasingly competitive, with at least 37 people registering as candidates. Kalibaf's registration came on the final day for potential candidates to apply for participation in the election. The Conservative Guardians Council, which consists of 12 hardliners approved by Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, will vet the candidates and announce which ones will be allowed to compete. Kalibaf had been pegged by observers as a frontrunner in the presidential race. He actively sought the presidency 3 times in the past. Notably, in 2017, he withdrew in favor of Raisi. Kalibaf's career highlights include serving as a commander of Iran's hardline Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. He held the position of Iran's chief of police with accusations of his role in a violent crackdown on anti-government protesters in 2003. He also served as the mayor of Tehran from 2005 to 2017.
And that's all on this episode of Eastern Express. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.